Yes. Yep.
Let's stand. Shabbat Shalom. We're service number 4, page 122, and the synagogue is beginning to fill up with flowers, roses from our garden, cheesecake for tonight for Shavuot. But this morning, let us begin by reading together at the foot of page 122. Eternal God, we come before you surrounded by members of our community. With them we share our happiness and it becomes greater, our troubles and they become smaller. May we never be too mean to give nor too proud to receive. For in giving and receiving we discover you and begin to understand the meaning of life. Let us not separate ourselves from the true strength of our community. The experience and wisdom of old people, the hopes of the young, the examples of care and courage which sustain us. Give us an open mind and a generous heart to welcome those who need us and to admit your presence into our daily lives. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam mozeh Yisrael bigvora. Leolam yehei adam yehei shamayim beseter uvagalui. Umadeh al ha'emet v'dover emet bilvavo. Let's read together this paragraph, this prayer that we offer on Rosh Hashanah also. Sovereign of all worlds, we lay our supplications before you, relying not on our merit, but on your abundant mercy. For what are we? For what are we? What is our life? What our piety? What our goodness and what our strength? What can we say in your presence, eternal God? Are not the mightiest of us as nothing before you, the famous as though they had never lived, the learned as if they had no knowledge, the wise as if without understanding? For most of what we do is futile, and our life on earth is but a span. Our superiority over other animals amounts to little, for all is vanity. Nevertheless, we are your people, children of your covenant, called to your service. Therefore it is right that we should thank and praise you, to proclaim your holiness, and daily say before you.
Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matov, Matov, Matov Chelkeinu. Ashreinu, Ashreinu, Matov, Matov, Matov Chelkeinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Manayim, Manayim, Manayim Goraleinu. Umayaba, 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 Yerushalayim, Ashreinu. Umayaba, 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 Yerushalayim, Ashreinu.
Foot of page 124. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam baruch hu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Hamchulal b'fi amo meshubach umfa'al bishon chasidav v'avadav. Bishvachot u'vizmarot. Nagadelcha v'namlichecha. Malkeinu yachid chei ha'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai melech mechulal b'tish bachot. Middle of page 125. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen v'amen. Baruch Adonai Elohim, Elohei Yisrael, oseh niflaot levado. Uvaruch Shem kovodo leolam, v'yimale chovodo et kol haaretz. Amen v'amen.
Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu, beruach kol masah, tefaeh u'trameh, zichrecha malkeinu tamid. Min ha'olam le'ad ha'olam, atah
Page 127, as we offer Psalm 93. No service is complete without a taste of the Psalms. Adonai malach geut lavesh. Lavesh Adonai oz hit azar. Af tikon tevel val timot. Let's read responsively and feel the sense of majesty that the Psalms give us. The Eternal One reigns in grandeur robe. The world stands firm. Your throne is established from of old. The oceans roar, eternal God, the thundering oceans roar.
The thundering oceans rage.
Yet greater than the roaring waves, mightier than the breaking seas. Sure are the proofs of your power, O God. So if you're comfortable and able to do so at home or here, let's stand for the Yishtabach as we move towards the Baruch Hu.
ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו. שיר ושבחה, הלל וזמרה, ברכות והודאות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בשירי זמרה.
Page 135.
ברוך הוא את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Let's sit down. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצא אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל, המאיר לארץ ולדרים עליה ברחמים, ובטובו מחדש בכל יום תמיד מעשה בראשית. מה רבו מעשיך אדוני, כולם בחוכמה עשית, מלאה הארץ קנייניך. תתברך אדוני אלוהינו על שבח מעשה ידיך, ועל מורה אור שעשית, יפרוך סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני, יוצר המורות. And together, great is your love for us, eternal God, and abundant your compassion. Our ancestors trusted in you, and you taught them the laws of life. So be gracious to us and teach us. Incline our hearts to hear your words, to know and understand, to learn and teach, and with love to uphold the truths of your Torah. Enlighten us with your teaching, make us faithful to your commandments, and wholehearted in the love and awe of your name. For in love you summon us to serve you and proclaim your unity. We praise you, O God. In love you have called your people Israel to serve you. Let's stand for the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto
Vahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavecha, uv'chol nafshecha, uv'chol mo'odecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, asher anochi matzavecha hayom al levavecha. V'shenantam lavid, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'veitecha, uv'leftecha v'derech, uv'shofpecha uv'kumecha. Ukashatam lo'ot al yadecha, v'hayu latotafot beinenecha, ukatavtam al muzot beitecha, uvisharecha.
למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים אלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Let's sit down. So the Shema is really the closest thing we have to a watchword of faith, And we always follow it with this commitment that what we've said and offered is true and to be relied on. Emet v'yatzi v'yashav v'kayam v'tov v'yafer hadavar hazeh Aleinu le'olam va'ed. Emet she'ata hu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu. Malkeinu melech avotenu yotzreinu tzur yeshuotenu. Podenu u'matzilenu me'olam hu shamecha. Ein Elohim zulatecha. Emet ata hu rishon va'ata hu acharon. Omi baladecha. Ein lanu Moshia mi Mitzrayim galtanu. Adonai Eloheinu mi beit avadim patitanu. Moshe u'Miriam u'vnei Yisrael lacha anu shira b'simcha rabba va'amru kulam. Shira Chadasha Shibchu Golim Lashimcha al Sfat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu Vehimlichu Va'amru. Stand. We're on page 140. We stand for the tefillah, the standing prayer. But if you're not able to stand, the kavanah, intention of prayer, is the same. Baruch atah Adonai, Elohei avotei, Elohei. Can I start again, please? I was thinking of our ancestors for Shavuot. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor, v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Hasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot V'Imahot, U'Mevi Gula Livnei V'neihem, Lama'an Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Moshiach Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Machaye Metim Atah Rav Lohoshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem, Mazriach HaShemesh U'Morid HaTal. למען אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. לקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו, בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך.
קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו.
כבודו מלא עולם.
ברוך כבוד אדוני
ממקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך.
ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, דור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, נגיד God לבד, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, נגיד God לבד, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש. בשבחך אלוהינו, מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. כי אל מלך גדול, כי אל מלך גדול, הקדוש ברוך הוא. דור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, נגיד God לבד, ולנצח נצחים, ולנצח נצחים, קדושתך נקדיש.
Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. I think L'dor Vador just reminds us so much of how the generations of this community, of the wider LJ, Liberal Judaism, LJY Netzer community is so dependent on each other, so connected. Let's sit down. Now,
ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשים, מקדשים שבי שבת. כולם ישמחו ויתענגו מטובך שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. השביעי רצית בו, רצית בו וקידשנו שבת. וקדש ימים, אותו קראת שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי, שומרי, שומרי שבת
God of our ancestors, may our rest on this day be pleasing in your sight. Sanctify us by your commandments. Make us loyal to your teaching. Satisfy us with your goodness. Gladden us with your salvation. Purify our hearts to serve you in truth. In your gracious love, Eternal One, let the holiness of your Sabbath enter our hearts, and may all Israel who hallow your name be exalted by its peace. Baruch atah Adonai, Makadesh HaShabbat. Eternal God, be gracious to your people Israel. In your love, accept our prayers. May our worship now and always be acceptable in your sight. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otecha levadecha b'yera na'avod. Modim anachnu lach, she'ata hu Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu le'olam va'ed. Tzur hayenu magen yeshenu, ata hu lado vado, nodeh lecha saper tehilatecha, al hayenu hamsirim biyadecha, v'al nishmotenu hapkudot lach, v'al nisecha shebachol yom imanu, v'al niflotecha v'tovotecha, shebachol eit erev v'voker v'tzoharayim, Baruch atah Adonai, hatov, shimcha, ulacha na'eh lahodot.
Sim shalom, sim shalom, sim shalom, tova uvracha, chem v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol ha'amim. Sim shalom, sim shalom.
Baruch atah Adonai, Oseh HaShalom. Let's take a few moments for silent prayer and reflection.
Adonai turi v'goali, Adonai turi v'goali, V'yul ratzon irivi, v'yon libi lefanecha, Adonai turi v'goali, Adonai turi v'goali. Ose shalom imroma, huya b'nei Adam. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Let's turn to Kriyat Torah, the reading of Torah, the heart of our Shabbat morning service. We're on page 481.
Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai imloch le'olam ba'ed. Adonai os le'amo yitin, Adonai yevared et amo b'shalom.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlul Adonai iti onoramama Shemo yachdav.
Lecha Adonai hagdula, v'hagvura v'hatiferet, v'hanitzach v'hahod. Kifal b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, lecha Adonai hamamlacha, v'hamitnaseh l'kol l'rosh.
Let's sit down. So this morning's a splendid parasha, portion of Torah, also though with some very troubling bits in it. I'm trying to recall, Lillian, was it your year's group that had Naso? Parashat Naso? I think it was. So, yes, so Lillian, along with some other women, had an adult bat mitzvah read from Torah from this portion. So this portion has some strange pieces in it. It has the rules of the Nazarite, the one who is dedicated to God, whose hair isn't allowed to be cut, who is not allowed to drink any fermented drink at all. Nothing should pass their lips of any sort of mind-altering ability. And who is the most famous Nazarite of all? Just to see if you're paying attention this morning. Samson, thank you. So Samson, I think it's also always interesting for us to consider what would a modern day Nazir look like. We in Judaism tend to reject any notions of asceticism or withdrawal from life. So what would it mean to be committed, and to be committed from birth to a religious life? The other bit of the portion that we're not reading, and my colleague Rabbi Margaret Jacobi says, you can study this bit, but you must never read it liturgically, because it would give it honor and exposure, which is the laws of jealousy. The trial of a woman who is suspected of adultery. And as you can imagine, in the ancient Near East, it doesn't go well for the women at all in this section of Torah and what's described. So we're not reading that, but it exists, the law of the sota, inside this portion. But what we are reading is this kernel of wonderfulness that found its way into this portion of Naso, the second portion of the Book of Numbers, which is what we know as the priestly blessing, the threefold benediction. the blessing that we offer our children, the blessing that we say to each other. Rabbi John Rayner said, don't worry about the implication of priesthood. Make sure that you use this blessing in all parts of synagogue life. Lo and behold, in 1979, an excavation in Israel discovered 2 tiny silver scrolls. I mean, probably tiny, smaller than our baby scrolls in there, on which are the words of this priestly blessing, which is the first time that we saw that things were happening alongside biblical writings, Torah writings, that had an impact. And I think this blessing, which will feel very familiar to all of us, is a blessing that finds its way both into the heart of synagogue life and home life. And I think of Dean's melody that he wrote for our congregation on the occasion of Amon's bar mitzvah, which is now part of our liturgy and the way that we offer a blessing to each other. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered by a local shepherd boy roaming around the caves of Qumran looking for a lost goat, finding those extraordinary jars of scraps of parchment on which biblical texts were written. One of them was an alternative to this priestly blessing. So let me just share, as we did last night, the words that are a tiny bit similar, but different enough to merit us noting them. May God bless you with all good, keep you from all evil. May God teach your heart the meaning of life and grant you knowledge of the infinite. May God reach out to you in tenderness, that you may have enduring peace. So let's hear from the Torah this morning. Delighted to be calling up Laura and any grandchildren that you would like to gather with you. So just Emmy. Ta'amod Leah Chava bat Elimelech v'Sarah levarech et haTorah. Here, Emmy, this is where we are beginning. Can you peek in? Can you see it? Okay, it's very beautiful, isn't it? And I'm going to read this.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach.
Baruch Adonai hamavorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamavorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. You want to hold on for me? Yeah. So we are at the end of chapter 6, going into chapter 7. V'yadaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Daber el Aharon ve'el banav lemor. Ko tivarchu et bnei Yisrael. Emor lachem. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. V'samor et shami al bnei Yisrael ani avarechechem. Vayehi b'yom kalot Moshe lahakim et hamishkan vayimshach oto v'yikadesh oto ve'et kol kalav ve'et hamizbeach ve'et kol kalav vayimshachem v'yikadesh otam v'yakrivu nasi'ei Yisrael roshei beit avotam hem nasi'ei hamatot hem haomdim al hapikudim v'yaviu et korbanam lifnei Adonai shesh agalot sav ושני עשר בקר, עגלה על שני הנשיאים, ושור לאחד, ויקריבו אותם לפני המשכן, ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, קח מי איתם, ויהיו לעבוד את עבודת אוהל מועד, ונתת אותם אל הלוויים, איש כפי עבודתו. ויקח משה את העגלות ואת הבקר וייתן אותם אל הלוויים, את שתי העגלות ואת ארבעת הבקר נתן לבני גרשון, כפי עבודתם, ואת ארבע הגלת ואת שמונת הבקר נתן לבני מררי. כפי עבודתם, ביד איתמר בן אהרון הכהן, ולפני קהת לא נתן, כי עבודת הקדוש עליהם בכתף. יישאו ויקריבו הנשאים את חנוכת המזבח ביום המשכח, ביום המשך אותו, ויקריבו הנשיאים את קורבנם לפני המזבח. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, נשיאי אחד ליום, נשיא אחד ליום, יקריבו את קורבנם להנחם המזבח. So let's hear what this means for us. God spoke to Moses saying, speak to Aaron and all of his sons. Why? Because they were the Levites, they were the priests that were going to have this role, telling them this is how you have to bless the children of Israel, saying to them, may God bless you and look after you, protect you. May God turn God's face towards you and be very gracious to you. May God turn God's face towards you and give you peace. And thus shall you put my name upon the children of Israel, and that is how I will bless them. And then as we begin chapter 7, we see that this is the completion of the Mishkan, of all the jobs of the Mishkan. So we're told how all the people are to be blessed, and now we're told how everyone has to work and do their role. So it was on the day that Moses completed the Mishkan, the sanctuary, and anointed it and sanctified all that was in it, all the utensils that they needed for worship, and the altar, and all the utensils on the altar. And when Moses sanctified them and anointed them, then the princes of Israel, the heads of the tribes of all the ancestors, the princes of the tribes brought their offerings. And they were the princes who had overseen the census that we heard about last week. So they'd overseen the counting. And they brought their offerings before God. And this is what they bought. This is what the whole community bought via the priests. So when you heard the repetition of the word agala, chariot, and the word bakar for ox, so just pay attention to the numbers here. So the princes brought with them 6 chariots, covered chariots, and 12 oxen that should be given, so that every one chariot per pair of princes, and 1 ox for each one of them. And they should bring their offering in front of the sanctuary. And then God said to Moses, saying, you need to take all their gifts. You need to take their gifts because they're going to be used for worship in the tent of meeting. And you need to give what they are bringing straight to the Levites so that they can use it for their worship. So everyone, according to their role in the worship, will use all the offerings. So Moses took the chariots and took the oxen. This must have been very noisy and very messy, and nothing like our worship is on a Shabbat morning here at Finchley Progressive. So they've got loads of oxen, they've got loads of chariots, and Moses gives them to the Levites and gives 2 chariots and 4 oxen. He gives to the children, so these are the tribes that are going to be part of worship, gives to the children of Gershon, the Gershonites, according to their worship. And then he gives 4 chariots and 8 oxen. He gives them to the Merarites, according to their worship. And he gives it to them via, and it's interesting that we have the name here, via Itamar, who is the son of Aaron, the priest. And then he gives it to the Kehites, but then decides, no, the Kehites do not need oxen, they do not need chariots, because their work is to carry holy objects very carefully on their shoulders, so they don't need any of the oxen and any of the chariots. I really am rather charmed by the detail here. So they don't need it because of what they're carrying on their shoulders. And then the princes bring forth so that they can dedicate the altar on this day of anointing. And the princes bring their offering before the altar, and God says to Moses that each prince on this day brings, according to what they have brought, their gift, in order to sanctify the altar. And actually, I think I'm going to stop here because it finishes nicely.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam, natah b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai, notein haTorah.
Amen. Yeshua. So, Laura and Emmy, if you want to stay for the raising of the scroll, and Emmy can help me put it into Hebrew, that would be great. Let's stand up for Hakbah. Remember to bend your knees.
Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah. Me'amo Yisrael v'kedushato. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romenu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romenu. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romenu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romenu. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon. Romenu Adonai Eloheinu v'histakabru behar koshon.
Let's sit down. The Haftarah, so that Aramaic word, nothing to do with Torah, meaning just completion. Shabbat morning service isn't complete unless we've read another piece of Bible with us, Hebrew Bible. So today the reading that we have chosen is from the second book of Chronicles, the final book of the whole of the Hebrew Tanakh from the writings. That the echo, of course, is Solomon reflecting on the temple that he has built, on the completion of the temple he has built, all those years after the Mishkan was completed in Torah.
The blessings are slightly different because it's from the Ketuvim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedoshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro b'chitvei hakodesh. Then Solomon said, "The Eternal has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. There I have placed the ark, in which is the covenant of the Eternal that God made with the people of Israel." Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Eternal in front of the whole assembly of Israel and spread out his hands. Now he had made a bronze platform, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high, and had placed it in the center of the outer court. He stood on the platform and then knelt down before the whole assembly of Israel and spread out his hands towards heaven. Eternal, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven or on earth, you who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Eternal, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me according to my law, as you have done. And now, Eternal, the God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David come true. While the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the king turned around and blessed them. Then he said, Praise be to the Eternal, the God of Israel, whose hands has fulfilled what God promised with God's mouth to my father David. For God said, Since the day I brought my people out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built, so that my name might be there. Nor have I chosen anyone to be ruler over my people Israel. But now I have chosen Jerusalem for my name to be there, and I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Eternal, the God of Israel. But the Eternal said to my father David, You did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. God has kept the promise God made. I have succeeded David my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Eternal promised, and I have built the temple for the name of the Eternal, the God of Israel. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik b'chol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'oer me'avosei, ha'medaber u'mekayem shechol darav emet b'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al chol chitvei ha'kodesh ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חיית, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה, אדוני, מחדש השבת.
Amen. Yeshua. Lillian's birthday and a remembering of these years ago of doing Naso together in the community.
9 years ago.
9 years ago, wishing you much mazal today.
Thank you.
So we're going to stand for the prayers for the congregation. Angela. Meanwhile, I'm just finding, while you do that, and Alan, if you come over here. No, Angela. I'm just praying so that you're able.
It should have been Corinne, but she's not feeling well. Eternal God, we ask your blessing on our Queen Elizabeth and all the royal family, as well as those who govern the country. Guide them and all who govern our country with the spirit of wisdom and compassion, so that they care for the citizen and the stranger and bring benefit to all the inhabitants of our country and the world. Bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. Bless our congregation and all its members. Be with those who seek your presence and all who are in need of healing, spiritual or physical. Let them know that you are near to comfort and sustain them. May peace exist in the state of Israel soon and in our time. May you, eternal God, grant blessing to her, established as an age-old dream and home to the oppressed. May its leaders and citizens be inspired with a faithfulness to the aims of its founders, and may the country be imbued with the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice always. May this Shabbat renew our energy to build and sustain a better world and to deepen our gratitude of so much that surrounds us. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And I'm going to add a special prayer to mark Her Majesty the Queen's Platinum Jubilee over this weekend and all the celebration that has taken place already. Bearing in mind that the first prayer in the vernacular in any Jewish congregation, synagogue in this country, was of course the prayer for the royal family and has continued to this day. Eternal God, whose dominion embraces the universe, we stand before you in gratitude and thanksgiving to ask your blessing for our Sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth, whose 70-year jubilee we celebrate this weekend. In those years, she has served her people with enduring devotion and grace, uniting races, creeds, and tongues with outstretched hand and cheerful countenance. You have endowed her with wisdom and discretion, with dignity and strength of purpose. In times of turmoil and distress, she has sought comfort from her faith and led by example, speaking truth, abiding by her oath of majesty, accepting the discipline of her sovereignty, and serving God with humility and intent. God grant her health and well-being. May she find peace and tranquility in the coming years and contentment in the knowledge that she has worked with a binding and conscientious duty for the good of her people. May her example guide the leaders of this country with integrity and truth, promoting freedom, justice, and righteousness so that all may be blessed with prosperity and peace. Blessed is the Eternal One, God of all humanity, who alone does wondrous things. Blessed is God's glorious name forever, whose glory fills the whole world. Amen. And amen. These are the words written for the Liberal Movement by Rabbi Alexandra Wright. So we prepare to put the scroll away. Thank you, Angela. To put the scroll away. Yehallelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado.
Odo ad eretz v'shamayim v'yarem keren le'amon tehila lechol chasidav livnei Yisrael am krovo. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Ki lecha tov natati lechem, torati al ta'azovu. Behold, a good doctrine has been given you. Do not forsake it. The words above are. It is a tree of life, this thing of Torah, to those who hold it fast, and all who cling to it find happiness. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace.
Ashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva kadesh yameinu kekedel kadesh yameinu kekedel.
So right now, as a way of a bit of PR advertisement for the Festival of Shavuot, we are going to have a moment of looking at the Book of Ruth, and I'm going to explain that. So for those of you at home, I'm going to screen share so that you have something that you are able to look at and see. And for those here in the synagogue, you have, I hope, and Jane and Corinne, there are a few more on the printer, probably, definitely, in case anyone needs more. So, the Festival of Shavuot is really a poor relation to many of the others. I certainly grew up in my Jewish home, not really taking a day off school for Shavuot or really engaging with this most wonderful of festivals. The reason why, probably, is that it doesn't have a ritual attached to it. It doesn't have Seder, it doesn't have the building of the sukkah. Home celebration of Shavuot is really down to the cheesecake. And as Corinne and Jane chatted to me this morning, what are the reasons we have cheesecake? Spurious, we're sure. Perhaps the harvest festival, perhaps some idea that with the laws of Torah being given at the moment of Shavuot that we celebrate, there was an idea that the laws of kashrut were given and people didn't have a chance to quickly get up to speed, slaughter their animals in different ways, ensure that everything was ready. So rather than any meat being eaten, it was all dairy. And what better way to celebrate eating dairy than cheesecake? But that is about as far as the myth goes of us eating cheesecake. But truly this festival is a festival that invites us to engage with Torah that we read every week, to study as we will tonight, to be aware of everyone who has joined and been part of our community. As we're doing tonight, we're hearing the Desert Island Discs of our musicians. We're hearing literature that has touched members of our synagogue alongside Torah. We are hearing from recent Ruths, those who have joined the Jewish community and are going to share their learning with us. Rabbi James Barden, dear friend of mine, is joining us to take us on a tour of the 7 species of Israel, complete with tasting opportunities. That's our latest session tonight. But I think the Book of Ruth is probably the best book in the whole of the Hebrew Bible outside of Torah. It is a book that is all about connection and warmth and kindness. And I feel for us coming out of COVID and that sense of being in a congregation with each other, of knowing, as we have learned to our peril, the importance of community and feeling a sense, thank you Monty, who's given me my byline for every time I talk about community, for having a sense of belonging. Nothing comes closer than understanding the Book of Ruth. So let me just tell you a tiny bit about the Book of Ruth, and then I'm going to share just a few moments. And this should wet your whistle, should be an amuse-bouche for coming back tonight for Shavuot. The Book of Ruth, we are not sure when it was written. It's incredibly easy Hebrew. It's 4 chapters only. It is either written around the 8th and 9th century, possibly linked to Samuel, possibly, although it's confusing because it talks about King David, the ancestors of David, or it could be written later in like the 6th or 7th century BCE, so closer. Either way, it has very astonishing ways of understanding what is in Torah. It speaks in a very intertextual way to the book of Leviticus, in particular Kedoshim, chapter 19. It seems to know the laws of the Levirate marriage. Traditionally, if a husband died, then the wife was required or given or allowed to rely on a male relative who would marry her instantly to allow the line to continue. Mentioned in the book of Leviticus, mentioned here. The idea that gleaners, those who were poor, had access to a field that had been not harvested to the edge. Again, we read that in the book of Leviticus. The book of Ruth is all about Ruth and Naomi knowing that they are able to do that. And then most intriguingly is the love and kindness, chesed, the loving kindness that seems to exist between so many characters in this book. But my favorite reason for the Book of Ruth is that there is doubtless the understanding that the rabbis get which is that Ruth is the first person to have converted into Judaism. Obviously, anachronistically, there was no word for Judaism then, but to have converted and joined the Hebrew people. And I think the way that she does that and the way it is described in such an ancient text with such extraordinary sensitivity sets us up to understand that this is how Judaism is meant to work. People are meant to fall in love with this religion. We're not meant to proselytize, fall in love and be welcomed. Even more intriguingly is that the Torah talks of there are certain tribes that will never be allowed into the Hebrew people. One of them is the Amalekites, one of them is the Moabite. Ruth is described as a Moabite. How intriguing is this? This could be seen as some kind of text to blow up the ideas that Nehemiah and Ezra said no intermarriage. Lo and behold, Ruth and Orpah are both from Moabite backgrounds, marry into this Hebrew family, and Ruth really is understood to be the first convert. Likewise, that sense of possibility, of inclusiveness that the Jewish community offers, of lineage. King David is considered to be the ancestor both of the Messiah and, in a way, for the Christian religion and for those who are committed to Christianity, that understanding of the messianic line through David and then onwards, we see this here. It is Ruth linked to David. So I really wanted us for a moment to just have a taste of the Book of Ruth, to really feel that sometimes there are moments in our text. It was Amos Oz and his daughter Fania Oz Salzberger who wrote no more bloodlines for the Jewish community. It is text lines that we have. And really the Book of Ruth is the perfect example of a book that speaks to us over the generations, over millennia, to be about how we behave towards each other. There is some scholarship that actually says, could it have been written by a woman, seeing as the book is so much about female characters, which is rather nice to imagine. But those of you who are at home, those of you who are here, I'm going to give us a whistle-top tour of the book, whistle-stop tour of the Book of Ruth. So, a conservative rabbi says about Amy Kalmanovsky, she said, we value human connectedness even more after COVID. We long for a world when we can be together easily. And look at you here in this sanctuary. Those of you at home, maybe some of you will be coming this evening or tomorrow morning for Shavuot. And most importantly, we long for a world where we can cling like Ruth to those we love and do myriad acts of kindness. So let's have a look at some of these moments. Through the difficulty of our hybrid service, I would love to invite other people to read. So unless someone feels like hopping up and sharing the beamer with me and reading from Dean's desk, I won't volunteer anyone, but if anyone arrives here, it'll be very nice to share with you. So what about the first moment when Naomi leaves Moab with her two widowed daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, and demands that they return to their mothers? Why? Because how are widows going to support themselves? Distraught, they both weep and refuse to leave Naomi's side. Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, turn back each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord, may the Eternal deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead, with the two sons, and with me. May the Eternal grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. And she kissed them farewell, and they broke into weeping and said, no, we will return with you to your people. Okay, don't be shy. If someone feels able to read with me, come and stand here if you like reading. Then what about the moment when Naomi again begs Ruth and Orpah to return home, to start again with new husbands? This time, weeping and heartbroken, Orpah agrees to leave, kisses her mother-in-law farewell, and heads home. But Ruth clings to Naomi. It's very rare, very rare really in ancient literature, that we see a relationship between two women in this way. They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. Then, what about the moment of human connectedness when Ruth declares to Naomi that wherever she goes, Ruth will follow? Now, this has become the watchword of commitment, both to the idea of a Jewish faith, of a Jewish community, of belonging to a community, but even people use it as an expression of love and commitment. I have had weddings that have chosen to use these phrases. So, Vatomer Ruth, and Ruth says to Naomi, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back, or not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Eternal do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. An extraordinary expression of commitment. An expression of commitment that some of our proselytes, our converts use when they join and are welcomed. Couples use together this idea of binding one's life in with the community. But we see kindness throughout. What about the moment when Boaz, who is going to be the redeemer of Ruth, finds Ruth gleaning in his field? As we know from Leviticus and Ruth, it is allowed for strangers and those poor. Even Thomas Hardy picks this up with Tess of the D'Urbervilles, as we see Tess of the D'Urbervilles picking in the fields when she has nothing. And actually that could be a whole day of study of Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Ruth, the Book of Ruth. But when Boaz finds her gleaning in his field, he insists that she must continue to do so and promises her protection. This book is full, as Amy says, full of kindness. Boaz says to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field. They are reaping. Follow them. I've ordered the men not to molest you. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn. So that idea of protection that he offers, even down to the men not to harass and bother her, which would have been a different story if Thomas Hardy had added that bit for Tess of the D'Urbervilles, obviously. Then what about the moment when Ruth returns to Naomi after gleaning in Boaz's field and offers her what she's gleaned with the portion of food that she's able to bring home, the two of them widows with nothing. She gleaned in the field until evening. She beat out what she'd gleaned. It was an ephah of barley. She carried it back with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she'd gleaned, she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill. The two women are able to support themselves and share what Ruth has gathered. Then what about the moment, and the rabbis have a field day with how Boaz behaves with Ruth, suggesting that Boaz was a much older man, pulled himself back once Ruth offers herself to him, and suggests instead that maybe he would find someone more appropriate for her to marry still within the family. Now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it's true I am a redeeming kinsman, there is yet another kinsman closer than I. Stay for the night, then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he doesn't want to, I will do so myself, as the Eternal lives. Lie down until morning. This is when he really reassures Ruth, you don't have to throw yourself at me. You don't have to do any of that. Remember, he finds Ruth at his feet, which is, I think, a very strong euphemism for something more. And he says, no need. Lie there, fall asleep. We will deal with the business in the morning. Then what about the moment when the townspeople witness Boaz's commitment to Ruth and they welcome her into their home as a foreigner, into their home, and give her all the respect of all the ancestors of their people, of the Hebrew people before. All the people at the gate and all the elders answered, we are May the Eternal make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of them whom built up the house of Israel. See the connection between Torah and this book, so that they can prosper in Ephrat and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. So may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Eternal will give to you by this young woman. The marriage is blessed, not just by Boaz and Ruth and Naomi, but by the whole community. And then what about the moment, we're nearly there, the penultimate moment I've brought, where the women of Bethlehem bless Naomi and declare Ruth to be better than 7 sons. This is a very unusual moment for a daughter-in-law, to be understood as bringing more blessing, more comfort, more kindness than a son might have. Saying, he will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law. They're talking about the baby. The daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. And then finally, this sense of family being connected, of Ruth bringing back into the fold a new child, the moment where Naomi places Ruth's child into her bosom, her breast, fully accepting the child and his mother into the family. Naomi took the child, held it to her breast. She became its foster mother, which we can also understand as grandmother. And the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, a son is born to Naomi, to the line of Naomi. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. So a taste of Ruth, of the myriad acts of kindness, of the sense of connection, of the, I find, the inspiration to never hold back, because somehow the adventures of entering into a people, a congregation, a community, a family can always yield great joy and happiness. So I really hope that I will see you tonight. Tomorrow morning, everything will be hybrid. It will be easy for you to join. We can't promise you cheesecake at home unless you make your own. There is a cheesecake competition tonight. I'm very delighted to see Corinne's already entered hers. It's waiting in the kitchen. And we have one. We've made an unusual one, but obviously I won't tell you why it's unusual, because then that would be weird at the competition. We are having our cheesecake competition tonight, as well as our learning. Let me remind you of our program. We meet back here at 6:30 for Havdalah and our Shavuot service. We then move into cheese and wine, because obviously we need wine, and obviously we need cheese because it's Shavuot, as we have a cabaret-style supper as we listen to Dean and Franklin share their desert island discs of being inspired. If Torah or Shavuot is about receiving the 10 Commandments and that moment of being inspired and brought together as community, then we're going to hear about texts that have done that for us. So the musicians will entertain us as we eat, and then we move into modern day Ruths, where 3 phenomenal women, Bobby and Gosha and Lorraine, will share their learning with us in the context of us learning a little more of the Book of Ruth. Then we move into a session of poetry and writings alongside key words of Torah. Members of our book club, members of the synagogue will be bringing great pieces of learning. I've already heard we're going to have a piece of Anna Karenina coming alongside Torah tonight. And then we will be having cheesecake. Deborah Lakin will be judging our cheesecake competition. Not too late to make a cheesecake this afternoon. And we end with edible, the 7 species of Israel, and why we in Judaism are so attached to these 7 species, from barley through to figs, through to pomegranates, through to grapes and wheat. So I really hope that we'll see you later or tomorrow morning for hearing the 10 Commandments read. So for now, let us go straight to Aleinu on page 520.
ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבותה את לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד, 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 אין עוד.
What we do best in our Jewish community is remembering and supporting those who are mourning loss and marking a yahrzeit and remembering together. And that is what being part of a congregation is about. Just as we turn to the yahrzeits that are being marked in this community, I want to name, as I did last night, the name of Zohar Collins, young man, member of the LJY Liberal Judaism community, LJY Netzer. Zohar died tragically this week, and I think the LJY, the Liberal Jewish Youth community, is reeling from his loss. And this will be the moment where the community will try its very best to come together, to support, to offer love and comfort, not just to his family who are part of South London Liberal Synagogue, but across the whole Liberal Jewish family. Zohar Collins, Zichrono Livracha. We turn also to the yahrzeits this Shabbat in our congregation. We think particularly of Irma Carton, mother of Marianne Carton, of Benny Press, father of Nicola Marzell, of Eva and Mark Morrison, parents of Dorothy Hill, of Sammy Sofizard, husband of Nelica, on his first yahrzeit, of David Aarons, husband of Beverly Aarons, and of Mark Solomons, father of Brian Solomons. Zichronam Livracha. May their memories be for a blessing. May those who recall and remember with so much love their loved ones, their family, may they be comforted by their friends and family and the words of the Kaddish which we offer with them. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shamei rabbah, bi'amar divrach yurtei v'yamlich machutei, B'hayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'yimru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavorach le'olam Amel Maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ah v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitada v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemed Kudusha Brichu. Leila minkol pe'irchata v'shurata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiram bi'ama v'imru, Amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shamaya, v'hayem aleinu v'yakol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael, v'yakol b'nei Adam, V'imru. Amen. So let's sit down. I can imagine that Shavuot, that this weekend of Jubilee, of all the memories of these past 70 years, is a cause for reflection and memorial for many of you, not just those of you marking yahrzeits. So let's bring all those memories with us as we prepare to finish our service tonight. So I've already announced and reminded you about Shavuot, and it would be lovely to see you. Just an extra reminder that next week our Delving into Judaism looks at the Jewish attitudes towards death and the afterlife. All are welcome, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday on Zoom. And Thursday, a continuation of our series of Mussar learning with Rabbi Renee Furtzel and I. This week, gratitude. I think it's gratitude. Okay, let us...
Can I have Rosh Chodesh?
Yeah, sure.
Newsletter. But Rosh Chodesh is on Monday night, and we've got Amanda Weiss coming to talk to us about Together in Barnet and what they're doing for homelessness in Barnet. And that's on Zoom, and I think I've put it into the Facebook.
Great. Great, lovely. So we're going to finish with Donalam.
Yes.
Yes,
Adonlam,
Donalam
yes.
on page 525 before we stand for Kiddush and gather around that table at the back.
Adon olam asher malach b'terem
It's in the fridge.
kol yitzir nivra
kept in the fridge.
v'et nasa v'chetzo kol azay melech shemo yikra ve'acharei kiklot hakol levado imlot nora v'hu haya v'hu horeh v'hu yihye b'tifara v'hu echad ve'ein sheni laham shelo lahachmira v'li reshit v'li tachnit v'lo ha'oz v'ha'misra v'hu eli v'chai koli v'tzorchev li ve'et zara v'hu nisi umanos li v'nat kosi v'yom ekra v'yado haftin ruchi ve'et isham v'ha'ira ve'im ruchi geviyati Adonai li v'lo ira.
Let's stand for a final blessing before we move to the back for Kiddush. So I think this talk of the Mishkan in Torah, the one that Moses built, as well as the temple that Solomon's built, reminds us of what it is to look after, to uphold a community and ensure that we take our place in looking after each other and the congregation. Mishe Shiken et Shemo b'bayit hazeh, said the incoming watch of the temple. May the one whose presence dwells in this house, hu yashkin benechem, ahava v'achava v'shalom v'reut, cause love and harmony, peace and friendship to dwell amongst us all. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. So those of you at home, if you get your wine, whatever you're making Kiddush over, and those of you here in the sanctuary, I'll just wait for you to grab your wine before we make Kiddush.
Yeah, I was saying to Rebecca, I've spent the past 2 weeks angsting over what I'm going to do. Yeah, well, Rebecca said 4 songs each. Well, so they're the ones that we put up on our... Well, I don't know. You did too. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, so there's the desert island bit, and then there's the well, I mean, she wanted two songs with a story something that goes back in one for. Yeah. Yeah, so like they do one bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we're ready for Kiddush.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
אמן.
לחיים.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.